start by stating your name?
Emmanuel Bertsch.
Okay, and where were you born?
Scott, Saskatchewan.
Scots. When were you born?
1927.
Okay. Do you know any stories about your birth? Was a midwife present, or?
No, it is actually Scott, Saskatchewan was a small town too, and it was just actually an ordinary house where they managed to have a doctor come and practice there, and I was maybe one of the few that was born at that hospital because it didn't stay open that long.
Can you tell me some of your earliest childhood memories?
The early childhood memories are, a lot of them are not that pleasant because we had what was called at that time dirty 30s, where we had to walk to school for example, for a mile, and the dust storms were so bad that you almost got lost while you were walking. And that's one of the things. We were regular churchgoers. During the summer holidays, what now a lot of the students call summer holidays, we usually spend the whole summer in going to catechism in the town, which meant we walked 3.5 miles to go to catechism for the whole, you might say, for the whole summer.
Okay. You were talking about churchgoers and that you want to...
Regular churchgoers, and we had catechism that lasted most of the summer months until school started again in the fall. We raised our own poultry, our own cattle, our own pigs, and my mother always had a big garden, which we helped take care of. We all had chores to do, so when we come home from school, we didn't just have idle feet or idle fingers. We had chores to do, which including helping out at the farm.
Before we started the interview, we were talking a little bit about your family history, so let's jump into that and start with your dad's side of the family. Did you know your grandparents?
I just barely knew my dad's parents. They died when I was quite young, but they immigrated in 1910, and at that time the story was that my grandfather and his family had an orchard in Ukraine, and because of the problems that were arising, had to flee and left everything behind.
And where did they come to? Did they go to the States or Canada?
Some of them went to North Dakota, and some of them went to some of them landed in Montreal and were told to board a train and go to Scott, Saskatchewan. That's all the English they knew. They didn't know any other English except Scott, Saskatchewan. That's where they were going.
Where did your grandfather settle?
My grandfather, well, I don't know the description of the land, but it was actually west of Revenue, Saskatchewan.
And you said you knew him a little bit.
Yes.
Can you share some of your memories of him with me?
Well, he was a man about 6'6", farmer that loved animals, had 2 dogs that were just beautiful dogs that would do his bid at any moment, and he was just a great grandfather, to visit. That's about that.
You said that your father actually came over from Russia as well.
Yes.
How old was he?
18.
18. Did he ever share any stories with you about what life was like in Russia?
Well, what they did say is that it was the best farmland, they thought, in the whole world, because they could grow 2 crops a year, and everyone was getting so well settled and adjusted in the area. But when the problems started and the military came, they first of all had to feed all the military, were forced to feed the military. They took from them whatever the military wanted and left them whatever they decided they should let them have. And of course there was big disputes with the system, and they of course fled as soon as they possibly could.
Did your father settle in the same area as your grandfather in the revenue area, or?
No, it was, well, in the general area, but it was actually Tramping Lake, that the town of Tramping Lake, west of Tramping Lake.
You mentioned that you didn't get to know your grandfather too much because he passed away when you were young. Mm-hmm. How old were you when he passed away?
I would say I was probably less than 10 years old.
Okay. Do you remember his funeral at all?
Oh, yes.
Can you tell me what that was like?
Well, the funerals at that time were always the saddest thing, because people took care of things themselves. There were no undertakers. It was all done by the local people and relatives and friends, and they all worked together and gave them a proper burial.
Did they at that time have songs at the gravesite that would be sung in German or something like that, or was it just a very simple ceremony?
It was mostly done in church. Okay. At the gravesite there was mostly prayers, and that was sad enough.
Okay. Turning to your mom's side of the family, did you know your grandparents on that side?
Again, just barely. Maybe somewhat less a time. They lived in Tramping Lake. They had retired to the town of Tramping Lake, which was unusual at the time for grandparents to retire to the town. They usually lived with the children, if at all possible. And they lived there till they died.
Did they also come over from Russia?
Yes, they did.
Did they come straight to Canada as well, or did they go to the States?
Let me see. Some of them, and I'm not sure about grandfather, but I think grandfather also, they made a brief stop in North Dakota. Some of them stopped briefly. Some of them settled for a time in North Dakota before they moved on. But I should maybe mention the reason they moved on. There's also always you might say not just a story, but why did they go to Scott, Saskatchewan? Because the government made them an offer at the time that they could take up a homestead for, say, $10 a quarter section if they broke so much land within a year or two. And the comical thing about that is, my dad had 3 brothers, and all 4 of them, being that they couldn't speak English hardly at all, made themselves old enough to be able to take up a homestead, which meant that the younger brother was not nearly 21, which the oldest one had to be in order to take up a homestead. You see what I'm saying? So it was mostly, the reason they ended up where they did is because of the government offering them the chance of owning a homestead within a short number of years.
So your mother's grandparents then, they settled at, they may have made a brief stop in North Dakota, but then they settled in the Tramping Lake area?
My mother's parents? My mother's parents did settle in North Dakota for a time. Okay. They were Crafts. Their name was Kraft. And They settled in Revenue, west of Revenue, and farmed there for, well, as long as until they passed away.
Okay. Was your mother born in Russia, or was she born?
No, my mother was probably born in North Dakota. I never could get that date or the exact place, except that we were told that if we wanted to, we could apply for our citizenship.
What little you do remember of your mother's parents, can you tell me what type of people they were, what type of grandparents they were?
Well, they were, like I said before, everyone at the time had to have a big garden. They had to be they're always busy because they all had big families. And to support the families and to break the land and just do the normal work took everyone. And nowadays it would be hard to understand that it takes that many people. But the more people you had, the better or the more chores you could do. You know, my grandmother, like my mother's mother, was a French lady. Her name was Lemire, and how that probably came about is like I mentioned before, that the border between Germany and France has moved several times over the last hundreds of years, and now the area that we came from as known as German is now part of France. So.
So, how old were you when these grandparents passed away?
Well, I would say maybe only about 6 or 7.
Okay.
That's I barely remember.
So where are your grandparents buried at?
The Bertsches are buried at Tramping Lake. The Crafts are buried at Revenue. My parents are buried at Wilkie.
How come your parents were buried in Wilkie?
Because when I got married, I took over the farm, and we built a new house for my dad at Wilkie, and they retired there, and until they're dying.
So, tell me a little bit about your father. What type of a person was your father?
In this day and age, it would be difficult to describe how fathers were at the time, or mothers were at the time, but I remember my father as a hard-working man and worked in the field, had a lot of help from his wife, and he was a church-going man. For the education he had, which I'm not sure to what grade he managed to get to, he spoke Russian, Ukrainian, English, and German, and did all his business without keeping any books. I always wondered how he managed that, but he became a big farmer, and he seemed to manage quite well.
Were you close to him when you were growing up?
Fairly close, but I mean there were 7 of us, you know, and I was the youngest and got in the way most of the time.
How about your mom? What type of a person?
My mother was the most gracious person you'd ever want to meet, the hardest worker, and had to have just everything done right. And she was a great individual and was certainly there to help the family and whoever needed help.
What was your mom's name?
Odelia.
And what's your dad's name?
Peter.
Okay. Do you know how they met each other?
Gosh, no, that's something I don't know.
Okay.
Don't know. There was a shortage of women, they told us at the time. So if there was a woman in the area, all the men wanted to marry her.
Who was the stricter of the two, Peter or Adelia?
Oh, my mother, my mother.
Really?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
How would the children be punished if they got into some mischief?
Well, I'll tell you, we didn't have this no hands-on or anything. We got a slap if we needed it, I think. And every time we did, it probably did us a lot of good.
What type of mischief did children get into back then?
Oh, boy, we got into lots of mischief. One of the most troublesome, I think, was on our walk to school, there were telephone lines, and on the telephone lines, there were those glass things that hold the wire, and I became an expert at picking them off, throwing them off. I could, as a matter of fact, there was not many left. And the guy at the local telephone office told my dad, I know darn well that so-and-so, you know. But that was part of the fun.
So
No, we hunted rabbits in the wintertime, and we had all kinds of stuff.
how far was your walk to school from your house?
1 mile.
Okay. Did you go in town to school in Tramping Lake?
No. We had a country school. Just about 50 students from grade 1 to grade 8.
Did you know, I mentioned before that some of the people that we've interviewed out in that area, did you go to school with any of those children that we mentioned?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure, some are our neighbors, you know, not after school, maybe we played ball. In the wintertime, you'd get out and shovel the snow off the ice and played a little shinny.
What was that?
Shinny.
What's that?
Shinny is, you don't know what shinny is? Well, shinny is when anything goes. You see, you go along and you have your broom or whatever, you happen to have a stick, and you try to get whatever you used for a puck, which might be a lump of ice, and you try to knock that in for a goal. That's you're liable to get knocked on the legs a couple of times, but that's why it's called shinny.
Okay, that's a new one.
Oh.
Let's see here. When you had mentioned there were 7 kids in your family?
Yeah.
Can you take me from the oldest to the youngest and tell me their names?
Okay, my oldest was Madeline. The second one was Catherine. Then was Michael, Barbara, Philip, Elizabeth, and Emmanuel.
So, what was it like growing up with 6 siblings in the house?
Difficult, because first of all, we didn't have houses like there are now. We had smaller houses, and we had to make do with the area that we had. And being the youngest meant that you sat where the others hadn't got there yet, or maybe even slept in a bed with 1 or 2 others. Everything was make do, you know, because there wasn't much room. For example, my wife comes from a family of 12. And you know, the houses weren't that big at the time, so you made every area count.
Is your wife German Russian?
Yes.
Madeline, that's the oldest sister?
Yes.
How much older than you is she?
Oh my gosh. Gosh, I wish I'd have brought that other book. I had all their birthdays in there. Yeah, all the birthdays, even my mother's. Well, there was only 1 year between some of them. There was 2 years between some. Let me see. Well, I'll say 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, I'm not sure what you mean. When she, as long as she was alive, or
Yeah,
after she died?
yeah. How many years were there between
The oldest one.
the oldest one and the youngest one?
What did I say? 5, 6. Well, I'll say 7. And myself as 20. No, that wouldn't be right. Well, if she was 7 years younger or older than I am, she'd be born in 33. No, 34. 34 is close enough. That's as close as I can get.
That's fine. Let's see here. When you were a child, then did Madeline? Did she help raise you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. She probably did just as much or more. Not only that, but being that she was the oldest one of the family, she had to do do farm work, because those parents that had a boy first were lucky enough to have a boy help them on the farm. But in our case, my dad, they had 2 girls first, so they had to do the farm work until Michael came along, the third one.
So, when you were growing up, can you tell me a little bit about what Madeline was like? What type of a older sister was she?
She was a good person, a very good person, and she took care of me a lot, being that there was that much difference in the age. And she, of course, none of the older ones went to school that terribly long, because they had to stay at home and help with the farming. But she certainly did a lot of the work that had to be done around not only the house, but the farm. And that meant picking rock or anything. Yeah.
How about
And there's a part about that I should tell you, that's kind of a sideline, is that the girls at the time didn't want to get sunburned like they do now. Now they buy machinery to get a tan. So what she did, my mother would buy sugar, say at 20 pounds to a bag, and after the bag was empty, she'd take that bag and cut slits in it, and she'd wear that so she wouldn't tan so much, because she said it wouldn't be proper to go and see the boys. That's one of the things they did.
oh my goodness. How about your other sister, Catherine? What was she like?
Well, by the time she came along, she of course had been all the education from Madeline, and but she helped along. Everybody had chores, including her, whether it was washing clothes, ironing, scrubbing, whatever.
Did the boys also help in the house?
Very little, almost nil. That wasn't the style at the time.
Was Catherine as equally responsible for helping raise you think?
Oh, yes. Oh, sure.
The next child was Michael.
Michael.
Want to tell me a little bit about what Michael was like?
Well, Michael being the oldest boy, and of course, Dad finally got a male helper who was very involved with farming, and any time that Dad had to go and look at a piece of machinery to buy, or what to put in for a crop, Michael was the one that got the education more so than we did that came later.
Would you play with Michael when you were a kid?
Oh, yes. Oh, sure.
What type of activities did you guys do?
Oh, we used to box and whatever.
Box. Did you have boxing gloves, or was it just...
No, bare knuckle.
Who was the next child after Michael?
Barbara.
What was she like?
Well, Barbara was, it's a little more difficult to remember, but she was more involved in this, in studies and so on. And she also had a problem. She had rheumatoid arthritis and found it very difficult all through her life to do a lot of the normal work.
Even at a young age?
Yes, because she got this deformed whatever hands.
Did they have anything back then to help ease the pain?
Not a thing. I don't remember a thing.
Who was the next child?
Philip.
Philip? And tell me a little bit about Philip.
Well, Philip was a real farmer. He loved farming. He loved horses. He treated a horse so well, and the harness had to be polished. He was a real farmer, and of course, eventually went on his own. He never did marry. When I sold my land, he also sold his, and moved into Saskatoon, and happened to live in Victoria Place.
And then there's one more.
Betty, Elizabeth.
You call her Betty?
Yeah.
And what was she like?
Elizabeth was a student and became a school teacher and taught school until she married and raised a family, and last number of years lived in North Battleford. And she's the only other member of the family that's alive at this time and lives in Saskatoon.
So when you were growing up, who were you closest to out of all your brothers and sisters? Who would you play the most with?
Oh, by Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Yeah. Of course, don't forget that we had on the one section of land, we had 4 farms.
Okay.
4 farms. So if you wanted to play ball, you just hollered a little bit louder, and the neighbors would come, and you'd have a ball game.
Do you remember who your closest neighbors were when you were growing up?
I had 2 uncles. They just lived in the next quarter section, and that was Stanley was one uncle, and then Joseph was the other one, and the other one was Ignatius, or Nels we called him.
And they all had children about your age?
Yeah, we were all the same age.
What type of house did you grow up in? I mean, 7 children, that's a lot of people. So.
When I think back now, it's such a small house. I often wondered how we managed, and it must have been just a big, enormous job for my mother to keep things in order.
How many rooms were in the house?
1, 2, 3, you might say 3.5.
And where did everybody sleep?
Well, the boys all slept in the one wing, and the girls all slept in the other wing.
Okay. Did everybody have their own bed, or did people share?
We shared. And another thing, we didn't have any private bathrooms either.
I'm guessing no running water either.
No.
Let's see here. Tell me a little bit about what life was like on a farm back then. What type of things did you have to do for your daily life?
Well, for example, and I'm thinking of now, at an age when I could help along with chores and so on, and that would mean getting up and probably going out and feeding the stock. And sometimes we had to get the stock from a distance, which meant a little more time. And then there was milking cows and gathering the eggs or whatever. And then we actually carried our water. We had 2 wells. One well the water was not fitted for humans, so we used it as a kind of a cooling place where mother kept her vegetables, just above the water. And the other one, we carried the water to the house. So one of them had a pump on it, and for washing, we just took it from the dugout. There was actually so much to do, and of course, being that it was such dry years, we didn't have good pasture land. We had to sometimes herd the cattle somewhere else, so that would take a lot of time, and would be a full-time thing. You had to there was no end to it. Year after year it was dry. It never seemed to rain. Unbelievable. When I think back now, I can't believe that it happened. That it could go on that long without any rain. And like the dust storm, instead of now, if we have winds like we've had this summer, we couldn't see. We'd all be covered with dust.
This lack of rain, how detrimental was that to your dad's crop?
Oh gosh, there were some years we could only get a patch of grain here and a patch of grain there, and if there was a lot of gophers that year, we'd have to fight with the gophers to see who got the grain first. That's a fact.
So did you ever trap gophers?
Absolutely.
Can you tell me how you would trap gophers?
We'd snare them. We had the gopher traps. At that time, they're not legal anymore now, I guess, but gopher traps. And then later on, we had, of course, the 22, which we would use to shoot them.
Would you be able to take these into town for payment somewhere, or?
No, my dad would give us a half a cent or whatever. I forget what it was. A tail.
Okay. So how would you chop the tails off?
You don't chop it off. No. The tail is just a soft little thing there that comes off easy. Do you want to know?
Just yank it?
Do you want to know a local story?
Huh.
My neighbor right now is a young couple. They moved in from Ottawa, and they redid our park, and there were gophers all over the park. And being that they redid the park and made a hill here, and all the gophers moved into our yards. So we all had gophers, and I took care of my own gophers. But the neighbor lady come over, and then she knew it was a gopher, but she said, "Mr. Bertsch, could you take care of this for me?" I said, "Well, I'll see. I'll try my best." So I set the gopher trap, caught the gopher. And the next day I said to her, when she was outside, I said to her, by the way, I got that gopher. I said, I took care of it. She said, "Did you take it out in the park and turn it loose?" I said, "He was in no shape to be turned loose, I'll tell you."
So when you were growing up, did you trap other things besides just gophers?
Yes, we trapped rabbits. Of course, we tried to sell them if we could. But, oh yeah, there was other animals, but we weren't into it that big, Some of the neighbors were. Some of the neighbors made real good money at it. We just got the odd one. That's it.
Okay. Since you were the youngest on the farm, did you have to help out in the fields?
Oh, yes.
Okay, what type of work did you have to do out in the fields?
Oh, my, we had to pick rock. We had to sit on a plow with the horses pulling it. And I still remember what we called harrows, that you usually harrow after you seed. And we had harrows that didn't even have a cart to sit on. we had a walk behind it. So the number of miles that the horses made in a day, we also made that many miles walking behind them. So you can see where there was very little time for any fun kind of thing, you know. We were working most of the time.
You mentioned horse-powered equipment.
Hmm.
Did you have a tractor on your farm?
Later on we did.
Okay, but
Oh,
not
yeah.
in your early years?
Oh no, heavens no, everything was horses.
How many teams of horses did you have to work on the farm?
Two teams of horses.
Would those be working at the same time in the day, or would you rotate them in and out?
That depended, you know, on the feed. If we had good feed, we'd work them all the time. If we didn't, we'd have to change off. Rest 4 horses while 4 horses are working.
So how long could you work a team of horses before they needed to rest?
Well, you'd say start in the morning of say 8 o'clock, and you work till 12. And then maybe at 12:30, 1 o'clock, you start again, and you work till 5 or whatever. That's when everything was going good. But if the feed wasn't there, then of course the horses couldn't work as good.
Was there ever any overuse of horse, or to where they were sick? Or?
Absolutely. And they got shoulder sores from the collar, you know, from pulling all day long, and we had to tend to that.
How would you tend to those type of things?
Well, we usually got a salve we applied and tried to heal it, and if it got so bad, we'd have to rest the horse until it got better. It was a full-time thing. There was no time for monkey business.
On the farm, besides horses, what other animals did you have?
We had cows, we had pigs, we had chickens, we had turkeys, we had geese, we had ducks.
Little of everything.
We had everything. My mother just loved them.
Whose responsibility was it to care for all of those animals?
Well, we all kind of helped, but Mother, she made sure that they were well cared for.
With the chickens and the ducks and the geese, who would do the butchering of those?
Probably someone in the family, and most of the time it wasn't my dad, because he couldn't do it.
Really?
No. Later on I did myself.
So how did you butcher a chicken?
Well, you see, it used to be known, and my mother would be the first one to tell me a chicken has to be bled properly. And to bleed a chicken properly, you have to cut the artery, which is no doubt about it, and which is the simplest way to do it is cut the head off. So you cut the head off, and it bleeds in a matter of seconds, and then the meat is much better. And I'll tell you, you go to any restaurant in Saskatoon, and we were to a famous restaurant not long ago, and all around the bones was all black, where the chicken wasn't bled properly. And my mother would be the first one to point it out. She used to say, it's not fit to eat. You don't kill a chicken unless you bleed it properly. But nowadays, with the Humane Society, you can't just kill a chicken. You have to, I don't know how they do it.
Before, when we first met, you had mentioned something about using all the parts of every animal. And so what on a chicken would you use for meals?
We didn't, but I know we had neighbors that would even cook the head. I know we ourselves would prepare the feet. My mother would always skin the feet, and whatever dish, they use certain parts to make certain dishes, more so than others. But I know of a family that used even the head.
So how would you eat the feet?
How do we?
How'd you
Oh,
eat the
it's
feet?
good. Very good. They're very appetizing.
Really?
But you can still buy them today, you know. Absolutely. But you see, a lot of them say, look at the mess they walk in. That's not the point. The point is my mother skinned them. Took all the skin off. So, you know.
Was that something that you would say is a German tradition, or was that
No.
just...
I'll tell you who's famous for chicken feet right now is Chinese. Chinese people eat chicken feet. They make certain dishes with chicken feet. And I noticed the other day at Super Value where one of them bought a whole bunch of them. Because they do make soup and stuff with them, you know. You can make soup with chicken feet.
So what would be the best way to pluck a chicken to get all the feathers off?
Now there is a trick to it, because you have to, in those days anyways, and I would say today I would probably do the same thing, you have to dip it in scalding water. And then the body of the chicken automatically seems to relax the feathers, and they come out real easy.
Could you do that same thing for ducks and geese?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. What about the butchering process of the larger animals, the cows and the pigs? Who would do that on the farm?
I could.
Okay. Could your dad
No,
stop with that?
my dad would stay away until it was time to cut it up or something, but my dad couldn't do it.
How would you kill the cows or the pigs? What would you use to kill them?
Well, usually we had 22.
Okay. And then what?
They have to be bled. Again, the same process. They have to be bled properly, or the meat is never the same.
How do you bleed a cow?
Cut its throat.
Same with a pig?
Absolutely. It's the simplest way. I'll tell you, on a chicken there was a knack that I learned later on, and that's if you take a knife and there's a blood vessel in the roof of their mouth, that if you cut that, but you see, there's different ways of doing it, I suppose. But I'd say the most inhumane or humane thing to do was do it quickly. Like, there's no use making them walk across an electrocuting thing and electrocuting them first, because you're actually killing them twice.
So when you would shoot a cow or a pig, would you shoot them in the head?
Oh, absolutely.
That would be the quickest way to...
Yeah.
And then would you string them up, or did you
Yes.
put them on the ground?
No, string them up.
Okay. In the barn, or?
Usually we had tri-pole out front of the barn. You know, 3 poles.
You just hang it right there and... So with the cows, what part of the cow would you use?
Well, of course you don't use the head at all. Not like on a pig. And then you skin it. And hopefully sell the skin for $1 or $2 or whatever you can get. And roll out the inside, the stomach and stuff, which you don't use, and that gets disposed of. And the rest of it, you prepare it for, different portions.
And what about the pig? What parts of the pig?
Well,
would you use?
on the pig, you used almost everything. Everything but the squeal.
You mentioned at one point pickled pig's feet.
Yes, and they're delicious. I just love them.
Can you tell me how those are made?
My wife is an expert at it, and I cut them up into small portions, and each knuckle, separate each knuckle, and then you put habicure, mix habicure in hot water and bay leaf and peppers. You put them, make a brine, and you put them in, and overnight or 2 days, whatever, overnight, and no, you cook them. You see, you have to cook them, but then you leave them in the fridge overnight, and then they're ready to eat.
And you mentioned head cheese before. You want to talk a little bit about the process for head cheese?
The head cheese is, well, it's made usually with the stomach of the pig, which my mother cleaned very thoroughly and turned it inside out in order to stuff it. And to stuff it, they say you don't use the best cuts of your pig. You use like the head meat, and there's certain other parts of the pig that you cook and put it in there, and of course with seasoning, and that's your head cheese. And now, if you don't have a stomach to put them in, you don't necessarily need one. You can take like a bag, an empty bag of sugar with sugar that was sugar in it, and put it in there too. Well, one thing you do, you compress it, and like you have to compress it after it's cooked, and that's what really puts the finishing touches to it.
Since you did a lot of butchering, my guess is you also made some sausage in your day.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk a little bit about making sausage?
Sausage is well, we always believed in what we called a German kind of, making a German sausage. And a German sausage is actually the simplest way that I can think of making a sausage, which is you usually, if you can, mix half pork, half beef, or thereabouts. And then you put salt and pepper, and you crush garlic and use the juice from the crushed garlic and put it in there, and that's it. Very simple. And if there was some for sale like that, I'd buy them all the time.
Was this something that would be smoked, or was it?
Yes, well, that's another thing. You see, that's another additive. You see, you can smoke it. You can put a little pinch of habicure in it to make it taste like smoke. You know, there's different things you can do.
When you were growing up, did you smoke a lot of it, or?
We usually smoked the sausage with wood chips. After.
Did you have like a smoke house, or was
No.
something that you...
We just used whatever we had. If you put up a little shelter and hung them up, you can hang them on a fence. You can hang them anywhere. If the smoke's blowing that way, and in no time at all, they're smoked.
What about making homemade alcohol or beer, wine, those type of things? Was that something your family did?
Not a drop.
Okay.
Not a drop.
How about root beer?
Not a drop.
Okay.
No. My dad bought a gallon of homebrew one time from a guy, whoever he was, and was going to save it for a big birthday party because St. Peter and Paul is on the 29th of June. I think he was going to use it that day. And in the meantime, somebody must have squealed because somebody came in and stole the dang homebrew, and we never had any.
So I'm guessing you're talking about names days with St.
There was no birthdays. It's all names days.
Okay. So you want to tell me a little bit about how names days were celebrated?
Well, of course, we all basically wish we were saints. You know, we live to try to be like saints, and we want to copy to be like a saint. And I have a little difficulty there because there's no Saint Emmanuel. So I have a problem.
There's no Saint Emmanuel. I never knew that.
We'll see. But I'll tell you, in the four families, the four Bertsch families, there's 3 Joes, there's 4 Mikes, and 3 Petes. And because they had to be named after a saint. And then one day, when I came along, I guess, there was Another immigrant came, Emmanuel Seifert, spelled Seifert, and he was the lucky man. I was named after him.
So if you didn't celebrate birthdays and you don't have a names day, you kind of got left out on that
I
celebration.
did. No, but I made up for it at Christmas time. Because, what's the 25th of December?
It's Christmas.
No, it's Emmanuel Day.
Ah!
Yeah, isn't that right there? It is.
Oh my goodness. So you...
And the child shall be born and he shall be called Emmanuel. You gotta get the whole drift of it.
Okay. So tell me about Christmas when you were growing up. How would you celebrate Christmas?
Well, to explain it in English might be difficult because we had St. Nicholas Day, and St. Nicholas was, for whatever reason, was known as the bad character. And some of our neighbors would put on some kind of a thing that was not good for the children. Are all scared because St. Nicholas or the bad character's coming, eh? But at Christmas time, the way we celebrate it, usually, if we had a box of apples or a box of oranges, and we always bought nuts and peanuts, so we always had that kind of a celebration. And every house that I remember us going to in our area, they all had the same. And of course, food, everybody, you see those immigrants, they were so different than people think today, because my grandparents probably, when they went to sleep at night, turned the wagon box upside down, and that's where they slept. And if a new immigrant come along, they just move in with them. You see, so it's so different.
As far as Christmas, how was it celebrated in the church?
Oh, that was big time stuff. Big time stuff. It's just like everything is reborn again, and there's hope for tomorrow.
What was Christmas Eve like?
Well, Christmas Eve, we usually went to church, and then after church we went home, and Mother had probably prepared a piece of ham or whatever. We had at lunch, or maybe had a few peanuts or whatever. Eh?
What time was this at that you would have?
Oh, way after midnight. If we had to go to town, well, we used the horses, eh? And we had to drive home, after church, so it would be maybe 2 o'clock.
So, with going to church, where did you go to church? Did you go into Tramping Lake?
Tramping Lake.
Okay. Let's see here. What about Easter? How was Easter celebrated?
Easter was another big celebration that when I think of it, one of the first things that I think of was as a little kid, we had to cross from the schoolyard over to the church in a procession, and every so often we had a station, we stopped to pray, and the road was made of gravel, and how my knees used to hurt from kneeling on this gravel. This is when I was just a kid. Yeah. But anyways, it was all church. We had the best choir in Saskatchewan, and German choir that won first prize wherever they went. A.E. Wall was a master musician that probably played in North Dakota.
How long did the Easter celebration last?
Oh my gosh, that must have lasted for 3-4 hours anyways. 3 hours, I'd say.
Would you at home have colored Easter eggs
Yes.
and a basket and things like that? Or?
Not a basket, but we had colored Easter eggs.
Okay. Were there any other celebrations at that time that you can remember?
At that time, I'd say that people were so glad to have neighbors, to have family, to work together, be able to work together, that everybody seemed to be, they're just glad to see each other.